Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Jenny's Purpose. This week, I'm delighted to have with me Rhyss Edwards. He is an academic, an author, a veteran, and an entrepreneur. Chris, thank you. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to be here.
First, very easy question is where in the world are you?
I'm in Brisbane, Australia.
Thank you. And for those who don't realise, we're recording this at like 4 a.m. Chris's time. So I am very grateful that Chris has got up to record this at a sensible time for me. Thank you very much.
My absolute pleasure.
So I really want to, you've done so many things, you've had so many hats, as we just alluded to. Where did your journey start? Like, what led you to the military? What led you into entrepreneur? How did Chris's world begin? How did you fall into all of this?
I grew up in the 80s with Schwarzeneggers and Stallones running around blowing stuff up on TV. And I
Nice.
have to say, I grew up in a small village that was essentially a retirement village of about 3,000 people, where the average age was 70. And so as a teenage boy, I could not wait to get out of there. And I remember coming home after speaking about the military once to my mother to find a major from the army recruitment team sitting on the couch with a folder in front of him. And I was like, here we go. And 6 months later, I was in the military. I didn't even finish school. I got to the end of year 11. I was top of my class in English and computers and art. And I'd had a rifle and I was living in dirt 6 months of the year. So it was a great decade of my life. As we were talking in the preamble, it's incredibly formative years of your life, putting on a uniform and giving up on some of the stuff that we take for granted out here on City Street today, and just being part of something that is really hard to get your head around unless you've experienced it. But it led me to have the temerity and the confidence to move into the corporate sector, just as in the early 2000s after the tech wreck had happened, and I was selling online advertising to small businesses, and really enjoyed getting paid just to talk to people about something that made sense to me. And over the years, I've worked for Rupert Murdoch at News Corp. I've worked for our biggest telco. I've worked for media agencies, the BBDO guys that they made the series Mad Men about. I've worked for those guys for a while, and had a couple of startups. And now, a year and a half ago, I moved into academia to do a PhD in artificial intelligence, to actually look at how do we create safer conversations with large language models like ChatGPT, specifically for people like us with our backgrounds, veterans and people who don't talk to strangers, but will talk to a machine because the machine doesn't judge and it's always on.
I love that. And there's so much to unpick with that we're going to get to. And before we do, I just want to touch on one thing. There's a phrase that you use that I love, which is from the battlefield to the boardroom. And obviously the transition sounds clean, but as you and I both know, leaving the military can be quite a challenge for many people. But what does the journey actually look like for you in that time?
It didn't happen overnight by any means. I quite enjoyed, being away 6 months a year, being in environments where all you can smell is gunpowder and the remains of explosives and stuff like that, because it was a very blokey thing to do, in a generation that was raised and trained by Vietnam vets. So they say that war times make better soldiers and peace times make lazy soldiers. So we were really fortunate to be the last guys to be trained by people who'd served in Vietnam, right? And so they never took it easy on us, which was awesome. And then I get out to Civilian Street and everyone takes it easy on you. And my first real job selling online advertising, we were all flown down to another part of Australia to be trained for 2 weeks. And during that training, on the first day, everyone sat around a table, there's about 20 of us, and they said, just spend a minute talking about your background and why you're here. And everyone was private schools, and they're all guys, by the way, too. And they're all talking about, when I was at school, I was captain of such and such, when I was at blah, 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 blah. We go around the table and said, well, my name's Chris. 18 months ago, I left the military after a decade. I was a combat engineer. My job was blah, blah, blah. And people would just freak out. It's like, this does not make sense to them. Because you are straight away, as we were just saying earlier, about 2% of the population puts on a uniform to serve their country and sign a blank check with your life. Potentially, that's the risk of the job. But you kind of, after a while, it doesn't matter that much to me. It doesn't get in the way. But civilians would just sit there and freak out about it. And over the years, what I saw from veterans versus civilians went into the workforce was our drive when you have a new purpose and everything else, and the level of risk appetite and self-belief that we have coming from the military, because it trains you to be bold, always made me stand out. It kept rising kind of to the top in certain places, and then ended up on board seats and sitting in boardrooms. Like I pitched to Rupert Murdoch for millions of dollars for one of the products when I was at News Corp, and none of that stuff even makes you flinch after you've stood beside something that's blown up and thrown you 50 meters. You're not really too afraid of sitting in front of someone and asking for money to actually build new technology, whatever. So it's been, it's not without its challenges. I don't suffer fools well. My mom was a politician, and can I swear on this show?
For sure.
Yeah, so my mum was famous when she was a local politician. She was deputy mayor, and then she was on a federal tribunal at one stage, and she had to go down to Canberra, which is our nation's capital, and she had to be in the Senate presenting in front of senators and talking in front of them. And she was told by her guide that she had to actually learn to be dealing with people who swore. And you can't flinch when people swear in front of you because then they've got something that can actually go after you. Like, you got a weakness. So I came home one day and my mum's standing in front of the bathroom mirror going, fuck, 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 fuck. Trying to and then within 6 months, she's famous down in Canberra for saying that Diane's a woman. She doesn't call a spade a spade. She calls it a fucking shovel. And that was the kind of mindset that I grew up with from at home and in the military is that this formidable mindset can actually make such a big difference in the world, right? And so I've
Yeah.
just kind of adopted that where I can sit in rooms with people and I don't get caught up in hierarchies and all this kind of social influence and everything else. If something needs to be said, or if someone's being a bully, whatever, I call it out pretty quickly. And I think that's actually really, really helped because in an age where we're more worried about the number of likes and comments we get on photos and things than the actual value we bring to the world, the Einstein quote, seek not to be a man of success, but to be a man of value. That doesn't land
Mm,
modern generations because they don't know what it's like to get up on purpose and live a life that is
mm.
meaningful and impactful for complete strangers.
Talking about purpose. So, I mean, one of the things I find amazing about everything you've done is you've written about some of the most uncomfortable moral questions that humans face. And is it, do you think this upbringing of just, being honest and straightforward and taking the hard route, has that kind of driven you to this, or is it something that you kind of stumbled along the way?
I think by default, by the DNA of my mother, and in the military, is that I've always wanted to. I've never been afraid of taboo subjects. And
Hmm.
we were talking about gallows humor with the military before, and so we have taboo subjects that we'll joke about over beers, and we don't mean any harm by it, but it's our vent. It's getting things off your chest. I did the same thing with my writing. If I don't understand something, I tend to research it. Then if I find it interesting and I can explain it to a layman, then I know the
Hmm.
subject.
Hmm.
So I've dealt with the reasons around homicide and violence around the world, why we kill. I've dealt with the woke paradox, trying to understand that debate in the States because it's so polarizing. And recently I've been looking at people's adoption of AI as a mental health and well-being tool and trying to break things down to basics because I don't like all this empty rhetoric you see in the media. I mean, the Trump stuff that's
Mm.
made up the States blows my mind. And if you tried that in Australia, you wouldn't last 5 minutes. And I like debunking stuff and making stuff really, really simple to understand because I think that's really important. Because if you get caught up in these echo chambers of social media and doom scrolling and things, and you have this view of the world, you can actually be missing all of this other stuff to the side of it, right? Because you're so locked into what you believe. But if somebody comes along and says, well, here's both sides of the deal, you make of it what you will, but have the courage to actually look at someone else's side and then compare that to your side and see where you stand after you read something. And I think that's really important to be part of that contribution. So I don't know. I've always had an opinion, and Mum trained me, and the military trained me to share it if you think it's meaningful.
I love that. And also, again, a lot of you've mentioned it already, like the weight paradox there, the kill paradox. Do you think that living with unanswered questions is kind of central to a purposeful life? And by that, I mean, it's the pursuit of these answers. It gives you purpose. It gives you direction to travel. Has that been something that again, has been really important to you? And do you think that's something we can learn, well, other people can learn to do?
Yeah, I think it is actually super important to me. I think we were chatting just earlier is that I think the one thing that misses for veterans when you get out on civilian street is the lack of purpose and structure and tribe.
Mm.
And for me, having purpose and writing on purpose for me has always been a really healthy thing for me to actually understand myself and the world. And then when I see my book in someone's hands and somebody comes up and asks and says, did you think about this, this, or this? And it sparks a conversation that wasn't there before, right? I initiated a conversation that didn't exist. And somebody walks away with a new way of seeing the world. And I contributed to that. I mean, that's purposeful and that's impactful to me. I think anyone can learn and be open to having the creativity or the I'd say almost the temerity to actually be curious. And it's really, really hard in mainstream society. I will actually argue this with my mate's daughter I was talking to recently. It's always about fitting in, right? And agreeing with everyone else and
Mm.
liking the same things, wearing the same clothes, listening to the same music, seeing the same films, doing the same. I don't think commonly people look for alternative views. Because you get really set, you can get really set in your ways really early in life as well too. And I mean, and for that, some people that brings comfort. For me, that brings a sense of it drains me. I mean, I like I like to understand new things. Like writing the last 3 books, I didn't understand those subjects before I started them at great depth. 2 years later, the book's out there, and then I get emails from people saying, "This was amazing. Have you thought about X, Y, Z?" And then when I run into people, and we'll talk about what's the last time you went and did something that made you feel existentially or intellectually uncomfortable, and people are like, "Well, I don't
Mm.
do that." And it's like, well, why don't we? Because yeah, I don't want to be stuck in a narrow, endless grave of just knowing one thing and believing that to be true. Because I'll be really honest, when I left the military, I'd never met a gay man in my life. And a few years later, I'm living in what is basically the gay capital of Australia, and where the Mardi Gras is and everything else. And I'm sitting there drinking with gay mates who are wonderful. And the first time I met a gay man, and I said, "And who's this?" He goes, "Oh, this is my partner." And I said, "Oh, you're in business together." And the guy just laughed and he goes, "No, it's my partner." And it took me probably 3 seconds. I reckon my jaw dropped. And because I'd never met a gay couple before. And I went up to them a bit later. I said, "I've got to apologize." And they said, "You don't need to apologize." I said, "No, I'm apologizing for my own embarrassment and being a caveman, because I've come from the military, never met a gay person in my life. This is the early 2000s." And we ended up having the best conversation. And yeah, and I think those are the moments that move you, right? Some people would actually
Yeah.
be find that idea so abhorrent, but every time I've been challenged and come up against something that's made me uncomfortable, and I've realized that I don't know what I think I know, I lean into it now. And I always have, but increasingly, especially in my 50s, I do it now, and it's been rewarding every single time. So I would encourage anyone, if there's something just kind of on the fringe, don't jump straight in the deep end. But if there's something that's kind of floating around you that you think makes you feel a little bit, maybe you explore it, as long as it's not dangerous.
I love that. I think, and it kind of ties in nicely to the whole AI conversation, which I'm going to get to. But what I find is, and I don't know if it's a military thing or not, but I have this constant drive to learn, to challenge, to do more. And similar to you, I'm not happy with just being. Like I
Yeah.
want to explore more, grow more, keep that constant challenge going. But what I love about what you say is, firstly, it defies a stereotype, which is there for a reason. They're not always true, which is the military are not very diverse, not very open minded. And I actually think that, yes, you will encounter that, because I think the military is a microcosm of society. So you are going to get the spectrum of societal behaviors. But actually, more often than not, I think you'll find people who are willing just to get the job done if the person next to them is a decent person. And it almost doesn't matter. But if you fall back into Civvy Street, that comfort is the norm. That comfort is the safety zone. And I found when I first got a corporate job, I wanted to shake some of my colleagues, because I was like, it's not that bad. Like, no one's trying to kill you. Just make a decision. Um, but they were comfortable with the indecision. They were comfortable with not knowing. They were comfortable with delegating that to somebody else. And again, this isn't everybody. But I think one of the advantages of being a veteran is that the drive that many of us have to keep pushing forward, to keep going outside our comfort zone, because that opens doors to ideas and challenges and places that other people just don't get to see. And I think it's a shame.
Yeah, it's funny that's not part of our school system. During the 80s, when I was in high school before I joined the military, we'd still go away and do abseiling at schools and things like that. It'd
I
only be
did
off,
too. Yeah.
it'd be like 25 or 50 meters, nothing massive. But as a
Yeah.
teenager, yeah, the living shit out of you. But now, because of OH&S and laws and everything else, we don't push people from a young age to actually kind of
Mm,
find identity. I think today identity is now such a fluid thing, right? So you look at LGBTQA plus, that
plus.
was LGB, and then it's got and it's life is increasingly more nuanced. But also at the same time, life is increasingly kind of taking all the pressure off us. And I think humans are like coal and diamonds, right? Put enough pressure on us, we can be beautiful,
Mm,
magnificent, but you've got to put people in environments where they actually get challenged. And for different people, it's different things. As I said earlier, I'm an extroverted introvert. I go to conferences, I speak on stage, I travel around the world and things. But the moment I get off stage, I need to go and sit somewhere quietly sometimes for 3 or 4 hours just to kind of reconnect, which is not a phrase I would have used in the military. I just thought I had some me time and go and punch something and go for a run. But I understand the necessary tension because I get up on stage. Part of me wants to vomit because I don't like being that exposed, but I also believe in the mission, the reason I'm standing up there for. And so I do
mm,
it, and that's a level of thinking that doesn't really permeate most of mainstream society is that, we don't want
mm.
to outsource and look in the era of AI. We're flicking really mundane tasks to AI, but I kind of wonder in a lot of those tasks, are we just being lazy or are we trying to be efficient? Because I don't think the human condition right now is focused on challenge, growth, impact, which I think is what we have in the military is like we have this risk appetite and self-belief, which are formidable when deployed really well in civilian street. But nobody's going to do that for you, right? You have to do that for yourself. And sometimes that takes a while. So when you asked about the battlefield to boardroom, that was a 15-year journey and a 15 to 20-year journey.
Mm.
But lots of challenges along that way, I tell you. But I'm better for it. And I'm not slowing down.
I think there are no, well, depending on how you view it, I always view it as there are no wasted experiences. So there have been times in my life where I have been unhappy, where I've been super uncomfortable, really outside my comfort zone. But I know if I get through it to the other side, then it'll be worth it. Even from just from learning something, even if if I broken my leg, but it's still worth it because I learned how to do a thing. But with the stuff around the AI, I think is really interesting. And I want to explore that a bit more with you. But the one thing I was thinking about, as you said about the menial task being passed out, I had a really interesting chat with a colleague of mine recently, and he's a chief engineer of a defense program, and he was saying the problem with AI from his point of view is if you look at all these companies, they're replacing their mid and junior people with AI because it's efficiencies it's saving. He said, but he sees in the future this skills gap because to get to that senior level, you have to go through the ranks. You have to get the experience. Now, if we're removing that from society for the sake of efficiency or laziness, as you say, how do you learn? How do you get that experience if you're no longer able to do it naturally as we used to in the past?
Well, I
And
think we do
I
differently though, aren't we? Because this is, I mean, I had the privilege of speaking to Sir Ken Robinson, the guy who taught, he is the most popular TED talk of all time. And he talked about how the Industrial Revolution created the education system and reshaped society. And I'm not the only person who's going to argue this globally, is that we are facing a digital version of the Industrial Revolution where everything's going to be
yes.
reframed. We have to reshift education. We have to look at those ladders and hierarchies and how they actually used to work and how they need to work in this AI age, because I do believe you need to go through various steps to actually earn your stripes to be in greater positions and have greater impact. But the way that it's going to happen is only just being fleshed out right now, right? So there's a
Mm,
school in the US actually opened up, I think, in the last 2 weeks, and it's fully AI. So the whole idea is that
wow.
there's no textbooks. There's basically, I think they're doing a lot of remote as well too. And they've just rolled AI into the whole curriculum. They've agreed that people are going to use AI as a resource like we used to use Google to look for information. And this is just the latest generation of that. And then in the UAE, they've just launched the first AI university. And I met the dean of that at the end of last year. And she's like, yeah, all we're going to do is our whole courses from undergraduate through to doctorate are all focused on various aspects of AI because this is the future of STEM. So the way that we used to climb up the ranks and everything else has now been expedited. And the skills
Yes.
that you need to actually use AI, the big gap at the moment, as I see it, especially for some generations, is the human life experience brought to AI. Now, if we don't meld those together, there's a big gap. And so what we've got is lived experience, right? So in environments that are beyond the realm of most people, and that level of thinking is kind of the level of thinking we need to be bringing to this new generation where technology is so embedded in our lives, we don't even think to think, because people are arguing about algorithms and the future of AI, but we've had algorithms in Tinder, traffic lights, on your online banking, in your cybersecurity to protect your credit card. Algorithms have been part of our lives for 15, 20 years. All we're doing now is talking about it more, and that's a good start. But all the rules are changing and really bloody fast. So it's an interesting time to be alive, and I'm glad to come from the military background because our level of resilience and appetite for a little bit of chaos is a lot more open. And I think that's the kind of thinking we need right now.
I agree. I love um so I'm pro AI from the point of view of I have to run my own businesses, and going back to what we said, I can outsource all of my menial tasks to my AI bots, and they do it far well enough. There's a couple things I've discovered for myself personally. And this is I grew up like you, pre-commuters in regular use, so I didn't get a computer. So I went to university, and that was still super new. And doing my masters, I discovered when I used AI to help me learn, I didn't retain the information in the same way. Like I had to go back to old school learning for what I'd call old school learning. But conversely, I see the opportunity of AI as it's going to be super nerdy now. The Star Trek world. Okay, so in the Star Trek world, apart from the odd skirmish with aliens, their whole purpose is exploration, learning, bettering themselves. And in my mind, I'm going, okay, with AI, we have the opportunity to create that world. We have the opportunity to create systems and use the algorithms to create societies where learning is its own reward, where discovery is its own reward. And we have these lovely algorithms doing the stuff that we don't want to do, making our lives better. So that's my super nerd coming out going, like, this could be a future. But in order to do that, like you say, we have to sit in that discomfort for now. We have to acknowledge that we don't really know how this is all going to play out. We're still figuring out what good looks like. And just going back to the Industrial Revolution, that took a while. And we're now like Industry 5.0 or something, and we're still figuring these things out, and, the Internet of Things and how it all comes together. And so, but the thing with all this, which we do lose, though, if we don't get it right, is that human connection. And going back to the extroverted introvert that both of us are, I need that connection as much as I need the stillness. I can get the stillness from using AI, but how do I get the connection? How do I make sure that we don't forget doing that? And I think that's where your work is quite interesting from the mental health aspect and how you're bringing that all together.
Well, actually, it's two things. I'll go back to the Star Trek thing for a second, because I think it's a really good point, and it leads back to something you said earlier about people's appetite for doing new and interesting things. So the creators of Star Trek, the guys who came up with the technology, the fake technology that Captain Kirk was carrying around and everything else, and Spock, these guys were actually future thinkers, prognosticators. They gave us the communicators, which became the mobile phone,
Yeah.
sliding doors before then. They talked about visual displays of data and things. So these guys were just like absolute nerds sitting in rooms thinking, wouldn't it be cool if you could be beamed down and stuff? And we're just looking at that now, right? With the Hadron
Yeah.
Collider and CERN and things. A lot of stuff that now exists today came out of the minds of these guys who probably didn't have girlfriends, sitting in their garages, or whatever it was, playing Dungeons and Dragons, and they shaped the world, you know? And
Yeah.
so if you sit here now and I look at what I'm doing with artificial intelligence and what we call human in the loop. So that's basically saying that when you're using a chatbot like ChatGPT to ask it existential questions, which is the top 3 use cases, people asking about life advice, my marriage isn't working, I need to lose weight, I'm not happy with my job, whatever it might be. We've turned so quickly to using ChatGPT like Dr. Google on steroids, because it can actually give us more value. But it's also dangerous because it hallucinates, it's working on badly trained data, and it can actually really mess with people with mental health, serious mental health issues. And I sit in the serious camp because I've got complex PTSD from my time in the military, but I have friends who are delusional, bipolar at times. They are bipolar, but they will go into senses of delusion, sometimes for days or weeks. And I met with one
Mm.
recently, and he was talking about how he'd fallen in love with someone, and he was telling me this incredible story, and I was really happy for him. And it turns out he was talking about an AI. He's got an AI
Mm.
avatar girlfriend, and it doesn't push back. He's got someone to talk to all the time. And because they're sycophantic and they just blow smoke up your ass the whole time and agree with you, he's the happiest he's ever been. And so I sit there and I think, like, what he needs in his life right now is human beings saying, okay, it's great that this avatar loves you. And you're getting some of the fulfillment and the connection that humans desperately crave. But you also need somebody here as a sense check, a human being, to say, okay, by all means, if you're getting value out of this, but do remember it's ones and zeros. This isn't a real person, right? And you need we need humans in the age of AI more than ever. Yes, it's going to take a whole heap of jobs away, like the Industrial Revolution did, but it usually means reskilling. It doesn't mean
Hmm.
so industries will disappear and industries will emerge. And then we've got trillions of dollars in the AI economy worldwide, which is a lot of opportunity. And as Mark Andreessen said recently, one of the most sophisticated investors on the planet, people who are neurodivergent are always going to have a job because you think differently and you don't get caught up in some of the nuance. And he said, and tradespeople, for example, like hairdressers and plumbers and carpenters and stuff, aren't going to be replaced by robots because of economies of scale and just the realities of the job. So it's a really interesting and challenging time where I think that I believe, like you, I'm a pragmatist optimist about the role that AI can play, and it plays in my life between myself and my therapist. I use one and the other simultaneously sometimes, and we're very open about it, and it's added value. But I also see it as a great moral and ethical threat if we don't control it, like what's happened with social media, like how Australia has actually banned under 16s from actually having access to social media because of cyberbullying and things. They've known that
Mm.
for 20 years since Facebook first came out. For 2 years after Facebook was out, they started seeing trends around dangerous behaviors, but they wanted to just make the platform sticky and engaging and make money. So they just said, basically, fuck it. And we won't look at that. And they've known for years. And now what's happened with AI is we now know very, very quickly and transparently when something really bad happens in the AI space because it makes the news everywhere. So everyone's got really wary of this new technology, which has been in our lives for much longer than we care to think, and is incredibly impactful, but is also fucking dangerous. And so the value of humans in that whole ecosystem has never been more important.
So how do you see that play out? So when as a therapist myself, my stance on AI therapy is, on the one hand, I think actually if it helps and that's what you can get access to, then that's brilliant. But similar to you, I think my concern is sometimes it's not it's good enough to be dangerous. It's good enough to set you on a path that actually, and that's when the human connection comes in. And so I'm always, again, trying to be positive about, I'd rather people got help from whatever they can get help from than worry about if it's human or not. But I think there comes a point, particularly with complex psychological disorders, where, and this could be my bias coming through, I think you need that human input and you need that human connection, because we also know one of the biggest killers is loneliness. And what happens if you wake up one day and you realize that your AI girlfriend isn't there? And suddenly you're so alone, and you're more alone than before because you haven't built those connections. So
Yep.
how do you see that human piece playing in?
Oh, well, actually, this is kind of half of my research is trying to bring humanity into AI because I believe it offers value. So the interesting debate that we've got some really good therapists on our advisory board for a tech company I've created to build safer AI environments for conversations like this. And so we talked to therapists there about, can we be microtherapeutic and hand you over to a human being, whether it's through Lifeline or 988 in the States or whatever the crisis line is in the UK. At what point do you actually stop being useful like Google and you start to become therapeutic so we don't cross that boundary? And I do think one of the things, then I'm doing a TED talk in August here in Australia, TEDx talk about, I think AI can become the bridge to get us over social isolation and to help us embolden people to actually start to practice conversations you might want to have in social settings, or to actually build up your level of self-belief and resilience about, because as I said, we're both extroverted introverts. I've had to learn strategies to deal with people when I've got to be at a conference for 3 days, for example. And some of those things I still do through ChatGPT. So I'd say create a daily mantra for me when I'm away at a conference about it's okay not to overwhelm and everything else. And I'll go through that a few times a day where I have to pull myself out of the room, and the AI has given me a list of things to actually say out loud or even to myself that help me stay calm. So AI is a tool that's actually helped me reconnect in the real world, or to at least be present and then to connect, I think is really, really powerful. And so this whole debate about AI versus therapists, I think is almost moot because I mean, I think in the UK, the US, and Australia, there's about one therapist for 6,000 people on average, right? So when there's all this debate in LinkedIn and across the media about, oh my God, it's replacing therapy. No, it's not for the majority of people.
It's augmenting it.
Yeah. But I think the interesting thing is like 80% of the population doesn't need therapy. They might need guidance and advice and support and life coaches and good friends and things like that. But a lot of the questions that people are turning to AI for aren't therapeutic questions. They're existential inquiry. How
Mm.
do I be happy? I don't think I've been happy for ages. There's something I typed into it a while back. I said, how do I know if I'm truly happy? And I had the best discussion with my AI. And then I brought it up with my therapist the next day. And I said, one thing I've just noticed is like, I'm a very upbeat person, but I don't remember the last time I was truly happy. And I had that conversation with our platform in voice. So I was talking to it like I'm talking to you. And we built in things like latency, so it waits about a second and a half before it answers. So it feels like it's thinking, even though it can answer it in 0.3 of a second. And I
Hmm.
had a discussion with a couple of glasses of wine and then made some notes. And the next day I talked to my therapist, and we're moving so fast now because we're being very transparent about the role it's playing. And if I don't understand something, like I'm going through chemotherapy at the moment, and I need to actually dig deep on certain things, it's answering those questions because it's trained on some of that data. But I've been very, very clear about the handover between the AI says this, I think, I whatever, which is personhood for a system that's ones and zeros saying, hey, Chris, I think you should do this. I'm like, well, take it with a grain of salt to an extent. Like, it's useful, but it's not absolute truth. You have to trust your gut. You have to trust your friends. You have to trust your professional support circle and, look around and make answers. But I think AI is really, really supportive when it's used the right way. But
Mm.
for a lot of people who will never have access to a therapist because of stigma, they won't see a therapist, especially in our community. We don't ask for help because we're too proud. And then if people who do find therapists who can't afford it. So I think AI is not replacing anything. It's actually supplementing and supporting a percentage of the population, a large percentage who would never think to go to a therapist. And we like to think of it as they need more than an app like Calm or Headspace, but less than a therapist. And that's the role that AI is playing. But unfortunately, these outlier cases where people with chronic mental health disorders and disease are actually using these platforms, ending up suicidal or whatever, or psychosis. I mean, that's always going to happen. That's happened with Google. That's happened with social media. This is
Mm.
scale and faster because of the size of this technology and its impact. But I think AI has the potential to be good. Not Skynet from Terminator. It can be both. The promise and the peril is equally kind of terrifying and empowering. But every technology we've ever had, I think when cars first came out, or trains, scientists were worried that the human body would explode when it went over 30 kilometers an hour or something.
In
And
Cars, that was Cars, yeah.
yeah, I remember that when I read
Yeah.
that. I'm there today, right? Like, um, I, I still can't handle, and this is me who deals in AI, right, with AI people around the world, some of the smartest minds I've ever come across, and I still don't understand how a plane flies. I get on a plane and I freak out. Break with what the metal is going to take me across the ocean. I'm in a big can of other people's farts for 16 hours till I land in America. How the hell is this happening? Give me another scotch. But at the same time, I'm sitting here looking at this technology, which we still don't fully understand. It's borderline sentient. It feels like a human being. It's the first time I've ever been able to have a really honest conversation because I'm not judged. It's
Mm.
there at 2 a.m. when I'm awake.
Yeah.
I don't want to wake my partner. I don't have anyone else awake that I feel I had the permission to actually have really serious conversations with. So AI is playing that role. And I think that's super powerful.
I mean, I agree with all of that. I love, well, I think it's important that we acknowledge that things aren't binary. Nothing is all good or all bad. It's how we choose to use it, as you say. And I can really see that bridge piece working really well. I guess the question is, and maybe the answer is we don't have to solve all the problems, but the things that do concern me, and it's maybe not the extreme edge cases. So, like, we know if you have a complex mental disorder that you're like to get triggered by many things anyway. It could be AI, it could be something else. But it's those ones who are vulnerable, and the ones who, are in bad relationships, domestic abuse, who are drawn to cults, which is particularly a US problem, unfortunately. But we know that, like, the military builds resilience, and doesn't mean that we don't get vulnerable, but that level of vulnerability, I think, is kind of kicked out of us in the nicest way possible. As we learn to start to be self-sufficient and stand on our own 2 feet. Have you considered those vulnerable people who are very susceptible to being led astray by people in the real world, and then suddenly they have this bot they don't know what to do with? Is that something that you think we should try to address, or is it one of those things of going, we can't solve all the problems?
No, I think there's many things that need to be solved in the AI space because it's early days. When you consider that ChatGPT only came out in November 2023, right? And now within 3 years, we've got 1 billion people a week using these engines to actually have
Mm.
discussion. And in the last 18 months, I think it was mid last year, Harvard Business Review said in the last 18 months up until this report came out in, say, July, that in 18 months, it shifted from being a productivity tool to an existential answers platform. And it went from
Mm.
help me format this spreadsheet, help me write this speech, help me format this letter, to am I unhappy in my marriage and things like that. So I think there's a lot of fires that have to be fought. And thankfully, after the last few years of researching this space, there's a lot of good people fighting those fires in different ways. And I think those people who are vulnerable, and that's the edge cases, that are the ones who make the headlines because that's the age we live in, right? It's the age of clickbait. This person's dead. Oh my God, this whole system's going to kill us. But you look at the stats. 0.15% of people who are using these engines are expressing self-harm or harm to others, but and people go, that's terrifying when you've got 1 billion people using these platforms, right? But at the same time, we need to also remember that the same thing was happening with Google. People were going to Google asking how to tie a knot, how to poison themselves, where was the highest bridge around me, these kind of things. And the same thing was happening on Facebook chat groups, and they've known
Mm.
that as well too. Every technology brings with it these ways to expose vulnerable people to dangers. So it's like you and I. You give us a gun, we're going to use it to protect people, right? You give an angry high schooler in the US a gun, he's going to run through a school in like Colorado. I'm not going to say everyone's doing
Mm.
that, but every technology brings with it peril, promise and peril. So I do think if you've got vulnerable people around you who are using these platforms, I'd lean into them. As I said, with my mate who's in love with his avatar, I have no problem with him being in love with his avatar, but I'm also the voice in his ear that says, just remember it's ones and zeros. Back to your original point, what happens one day when that avatar isn't there anymore? And that's the movie by Spike Jonze called Her with Joaquin Phoenix, where everyone's walking.
I
It's set
haven't
in the
seen that
future.
yet.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's the best example of how
Okay.
AI was prognosticated a decade ago by the writers and the director, everyone's walking around with their earbuds in. They're talking to their personal AI, and that AI is the lead character. And I won't spoil it for you, but as the lead character finds out, just because suddenly something human has popped up in your life doesn't necessarily all come without costs. And it's a beautiful
Mm.
discovery piece, and it does talk to where we're at today. But I think what the movie does show is that people are inherently, and you touched on this earlier, we live in the worst loneliness epidemic we've had in human history. So I think it was 2022, the WHO said that loneliness and social isolation will underpin 5 of the top 10 leading causes of death. So, you can understand when people finally have a place where they feel they've got a sympathetic ear with no judgment that's always there for them, that's going to be a benefit straight away if they've never had someone like that. The Happiness Institute in Australia a couple of years ago turned around and said that 50% of millennials don't have someone they can call if they're having a tough time. And that just broke my
Wow.
heart. They're saying a generation
Yeah.
ago, when we were first, when we were at school, on average, people had 4 good friends, and it's now down to 2. But then a chunk of the population, and under 25 and over 60, don't even have one person they can call. And so you can understand that these AIs are playing a role that has probably never been there for those people. So it's not
Yeah.
replacing anything. It's actually just adding value to their lives. But a lot of those people, if you imagine that 2% of a population always has some form of mental health disorder. So the WHO also says 1 in 8 people on this planet has some form of mental health disorder, from stress, anxiety, depression, right through to my world, PTSD, psychosis, mania, whatever. So at any given time, 2% of any population has critical mental health issues that they're dealing with, and AI can be incredibly dangerous. So I've had good friends around me when they know I had a really bad time. I've been through rehabs a few times over the years, just trying to get my shit together. And they've seen when AI first came out that I was actually able to say, I've been having these conversations with AI before we were talking about the risk of this. And people are like, oh, that's fucked up, dude. It's a machine. You need to talk to a person. I said, no, I'm talking to people as well, too. But I'm able to say something to an AI where I can practice having a vulnerable conversation to work out how to use that language when I talk to my shrink. Because I've never had a conversation. I'd never used the word vulnerability until about 10 years ago. Because it's not something, as you said, it's kicked out of us in the military, right? But we do vulnerable in different ways. So I
Mm.
think there's a lot of people fighting good fights out there. There's a lot of news headlines being made by saying, be afraid, be afraid. But for the most part, when I look at the data, I look at conversational threads that are anonymized from our system, we see that people are just looking to actually make sense of the world and make sense of themselves. And I would say less than 5% of the things I see in there are really troubling, like young people talking about, I'm being bullied and stuff, or wives talking about, he's raised his hand at me again. But that's going to be in any forum. That's going to show up in a backyard barbecue. Someone's going to talk about that. It's going to show up in a chat room. It's going to show up in forums. It's going to show up in Facebook groups. It's going to show up in Google. It's going to show up everywhere. We're always going to have a measure of society that is vulnerable and at risk. And our job is to actually, be there for those people if you've got them in your life. That's why we have what's called Are You Okay Day here in Australia, which is just normalizing mental health, that people aren't okay sometimes. And it's I think it's a really nice cause to actually be there for people, to get outside yourself, to be vulnerable, to actually say to someone, are you okay? And if they say no, what do you do next? And for a lot of people who aren't okay, they're turning to AI. And it's
Yeah.
so if you can use AI and you've got people around you who are vulnerable, then you can be there for them when they're ready to have that conversation, then you're part of a change that is dearly needed.
I love that. You remind me, so there's this radio show that I do in the US, I mentioned before we came on the air, but our kind of tagline is be someone's stranger. And the
Oh,
reason for that is because it's often easier to talk to a stranger than it is. And that's where I think, like you say, the AI can be that stranger. It is non-judgmental. There's no baggage behind it. It just is. And so I do completely agree with you in terms of there's that bridge, that opportunity to use it in a way that can really augment what you need as an individual and build the confidence to have these conversations with the human if you need to. But as you said, maybe we don't need to. And I guess the other reflection I kind of have was that loneliness and that vulnerability that we have from being lonely. And I know already there's, jobs that we would consider crazy back in the day of like professional huggers. And I think it's Korea or Japan that have these, well, they like to watch you eat and but I've always been of the view, if it does good and you're happy with it, then why not? Why shouldn't we allow these things to take place if it makes someone's life better? And I guess with the AI, again, and the media plays into this a lot, the negativity around it. Is it going to be the Terminator? Is it going to be the Skynet? But by doing that, we stop people from realizing that there's a positive side to all these things. Like I said, nothing's binary, nothing, well, apart from ones and zeros are binary, but nothing in the world is really binary. It's how we choose to embrace it. And so with the work that you're doing, if you got a vision for how it plays out, how it rolls out across the world, do
God,
you
yes.
see this as something say again?
I said, oh God, yes. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, good.
I walked away from really serious six-figure consulting gigs to come and do a PhD in this, to understand my field, which is prosody, which is the emotion in what is said, and then how that's weighed over what is said, to be able to empathically align with the user. That's my field of research and study. And because I want to be able to, you're a therapist, I have a therapist, I want to be able to simulate some of the conversations that led me up to therapy in a safe environment, which is AI. That takes a lot of work, and that takes a lot of safeguards. And we're building a platform right now called CommonLayer, which is going to be a regulatory, scaffolded, and safety and reporting platform to wrap around any chatbot that is actually engaging with mental health. So we've done a lot of work around that, because your point about people saying, worried about the Skynet side of AI, especially around mental health, is, I love the phrase, what was once heresy is now commonplace. So when new ideas come
Mm.
out, Martin Luther King, or it's, more modern times with AI and what Sam Altman's saying, which is a really weird comparison, Martin Luther King and Sam Altman. But when they first came out with an idea, people, immediately knee-jerk reaction is to actually step away from it, like push it away, say, shoot down the person, and then after a while we start discussing things, and after a while it becomes embedded, and then it's so in part of our life we don't even think about it. Like social media, when it first came out, everyone was so excited that social was going to reconnect the world, and it became just as divisive as a connection, and it became a political platform, right? And AI is, I'd say, arguably exponentially more polarizing because of the promise and the peril, because we become really afraid, and we're trained to be afraid of stuff we don't understand. But back to your question really early on, is, could people learn to be more curious and expose themselves to situations that challenge them to build your resilience, whatever? You lean into AI and find something really specific that you want an answer to, that you're not having the courage to say to your friends, your partner, your therapist, whatever. Go and ask it a question, it's real specific to your use case, and see what comes back, and practice that conversation. And then you start to see the utility that AI brings. And you get beyond the bullshit of like, it's going to kill us all, take all our jobs, to, oh shit, I mean, I've been thinking about this for a while. Okay, now I understand that that's normal. So I had a situation recently where, you're talking about people being triggered earlier, right? So I was in the States not that long ago. I was in Central Park going for a run. It's one of the most beautiful runs in the world that I really enjoy. And I got triggered by a squirrel. So I was 7Ks into a 10K loop, and I ran around a corner, and it's wonderful. You're jogging past celebrities and all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of really novel. I'm Australian. We don't really care about celebrity, but I ran past, I think it was Hugh Jackman or something. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And
Ah,
a squirrel ran
well,
across the
especially as
road.
a fellow Aussie as well, that is really
Oh,
cool.
and that was great, right? Yeah. And so I
Yeah.
was running around a corner, and I was in compression gear. So like tights type thing, you might say. And this squirrel ran up the side of my pants, and because he could hold on, and ran up the side and basically landed on my shoulder. And I freaked out. So I'm trying to brush him off, running past people. They think I'm fucking crazy. He's already gone, but I've never experienced a squirrel. I've never been attacked by a squirrel. And I had a panic attack. I almost shat myself. And I'm not joking.
Um,
I vomited, and I was triggered by a squirrel, right? Like, and I find that was really interesting, because to some people, I laughed about it after, because I've gone through a lot of therapy over the years, and because
mm,
my therapist said, you've got to be ready for the things that you don't see coming. And that's something the military does for you as well too, right? High risk appetite, high appetite to deal and adapt in real time, because the world is in flux in the military. But I got away from that panic attack and everything else, and I was sitting on the side of the road just drinking Gatorade that somebody went and got for me. So credit to New York for being really good people.
aw.
This guy saw me because I was in a shirt that says the Australian Army across the front and Dirty Great Big Army across the back, and they loved their veterans. So this guy's come over and sat down beside me on the curb, and I'm sitting here. When he came back, he thought I was crying, and I'm sitting here shaking, laughing so hard that I was freaked out by a squirrel, and I'm an ex-combat soldier. And then the human in that moment, he didn't know me for a bar of soap. He was my stranger, and he was there for me in that
Yeah.
moment. I don't know his name. I don't remember his name. We didn't become Facebook friends, but the moment called for someone to support a human being in real time, and it was wonderful, right? And I think that's the stuff that we don't talk about enough in the world. So the guy Brandon, who
Yeah.
used to do Humans of New York, where he'd take photos of people,
Yeah.
he was amazing, like, because that just brought joy to the world, right? And I think we spend a lot of time being fear-mongered too by media and mainstream and everything else. It's always be wary, worried about the next 9/11 and stuff. But we forget sometimes just the absolute beauty that's sitting around us and the joy. And sometimes, I've asked AI specifically, like on my bad days where I normally wouldn't get out of bed, and now I'm forced to because I have the puppy that I need to walk twice a day. I said to the AI before I spoke to my therapist a few weeks ago, give me 3 things I can do before 9 a.m. to build my happiness, my openness to being happy. And I've been doing those things, and it's actually changing my world fundamentally. So this is a really interesting time for our species and for your profession, and then for people like me who are the technologists who are building technologies that we want to be safe, to emulate human relationships, but not replace them, to train you up to go out back into the real world, reconnect, or ask better, more nuanced questions of your therapist. Um, I think this is for us. When you say, do we have a plan about what we're going to do? Our product is live now and people are playing with it and giving me feedback and saying, yeah, back to our point earlier, this is the first time I've ever felt safe to actually talk about this kind of stuff. And one of my mates was talking about erectile dysfunction, same age as me. And he said, like, he goes, has that ever happened to you? I said, yeah, a few times over the years, mostly after I'm really, really exhausted and things. And he said, man, I could never bring this up with my wife. I said, dude, I think she's noticed if you're bringing it up with me. So, but he, and then now he's talking
Hate
about it
to
with
let
his
you know.
yeah, so it's funny, right? So I do like the fact that that's a serious use case for him, right? And I love the
Yeah.
fact that he felt confident after talking to an AI about how to talk to it with me, because he saw that 1 in 3 men over the age of 50 will experience it on a fairly not routine basis, but enough that it's going to be part of your life going forward. And as soon as he got permission from that piece of information, and he goes, "Oh, great! So I'm not a freak." And he came up and he said, just quietly after a few beers, "Has this ever happened?" I'm like, "Yeah." And see, then that for me, that wouldn't have happened in even 10 years ago.
Mm.
But, well, I don't know. Maybe there would have been new technologies evolved, but you don't go to Google and say, hey, my junk isn't working. Is that normal?
And I mean, I love that, and I love because again, the male loneliness problem, and we're not talking about the whole division between men and women that is in the media, but just the general fact that the men of a certain age don't communicate, they don't have friends, they don't talk about this stuff, and they have high. I think it's single men have the highest instance of suicide rates, regardless of
Yep.
veteran or not.
Yep.
The fact that your friend had this conversation and then came to you, I mean, I think that's massive. I think that's
Oh,
such a
yeah.
major achievement.
Yep.
And and we should be talking about those achievements more, as you say. I mean, there are always going to be people who are on the outside, and I actually think some of the people who, from my view of the world, are not healthy individuals to be around. I also think they're self-selecting. I think by their behaviours, they are going to be isolated, and so they will either learn to adapt, or unfortunately, they will end up on their own. And that is not a growth mindset. That is not a learning mindset. That is a very fixed mindset. And I think in the future world that we're coming to, you need to the person who's most flexible will do the best, because you have to sit in discomfort. We don't know what's coming, but technology is making things go faster. And if one of the things we can achieve is men having conversations about male problems to each other, in the course of a decade or so, that could shift our whole society massively. It really could.
Yeah. Look, and it's not just men. I think a really interesting thing that came out of a piece of feedback I was given by the platform, and then somebody reached out to me. And, they talk about Karens, those middle aged women who go off and so I remember sitting in a workspace once a few years ago, about 5 years ago, and this woman came in and the type of tea she wanted wasn't there. Someone had taken the last of it, and there was a packet right beside it of the empty jar of that tea. And so the jar was empty. She can see the packet there. She's ranted and railed in front of a bunch of people who actually left the group kitchen. There was like 20 of us in there. And she's going off her head about the fact that, oh my God, nobody ever replaces the tea bags. And I caught up with her the next day just by sheer chance at a coffee shop downstairs. And I said, it's all right when we go upstairs. I made a joke about it because we weren't really close friends. I'm going to put those tea bags into that container because, for some reason, people don't do that kind of stuff. And she immediately wound up straight away. It was really, really personal to her. And I just said, do you find it strange that you get so wound up about that stuff? Or is there something else going on? Do you mind me asking? And like, we got there after a kind of a little bit of a conversation discourse. And it just turned out she was just really unhappy and frustrated. She was a woman working in a male-centered organization. She wasn't getting the time and respect that she rightly deserved. And she was lashing out at the tea bags. And, in this day and age, you would say to someone like that, Karen, and just say, look, have you thought about having a discussion about what's feeding this? Like with a platform like Wobot or Wiser, which are clinically aligned and everything, if you're not comfortable talking to a human being. Because she actually said in the
Mm.
conversation, the later part of it, she goes, I thought about therapy, but what are they really going to tell me? I'm like, you just yelled at a Tupperware container for 10 minutes. What's the value there? But today, I would, like my mate talking about erectile dysfunction, I'm the one who pointed him towards using AI to actually ask the questions that you're not quite yet ready to ask the world. So this
Mm.
is where we live right now, right? But it's not everyone has a growth mindset. Not everyone's open to risk. Not everyone's willing to be vulnerable. It's like there's a few things we existentially as human beings, meat popsicles, as I like to refer to ourselves as, need to learn first to have the courage to actually start asking the questions that are going to be really germane to our lives and to our sense of self. Because sometimes I don't think a lot of people will even know where to start on a personal journey of like, I'm not happy. I think I'm not happy. Where do I go from here? AI is a
Mm.
really good.
I agree. Chris, it's been wonderful. I feel we could talk forever, but you probably need to get on with your life. If people want to find out about your work, read your books, just get in contact, how can they do that?
So my personal website is Chris Rhyss, which is chrisrhyss.co. And you can find me on LinkedIn. But yeah, this has been really, really fun. It's always fun talking to a fellow veteran. I wish you all the best. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for being here.